All right, everyone. I am very excited today to be joined by Vanessa Lavorato. And Vanessa, you are coming out with a new cookbook, How to Eat Weed and Have a Good Time, which I'm really excited to share. And can you just take a second to introduce the listeners of Bite Me, who you are? Tell us a little bit about yourself. We're going to get into it, of course, during this interview, but just to get us
Thank
kicked off.
you. I'm so excited to be here. I love what you're doing. So thank you for having me. I think there needs to be more education about edibles and eating cannabis. I'm Vanessa Lavorato. You might know me from Bong Appetit on Munchies, Vice Munchies, the first cannabis cooking show on television. And since then, I have spent a lot of time writing this cookbook, which is called How to Eat Weed and Have a Good Time. Real emphasis on that have a good time part of the title. And I make edibles. That's what I do. I've been doing that since 2010 as Marigold Sweets. I also have a club of edible enthusiasts around the world. We're an international club called the Edibles Club, and I cook for them live every Saturday, and then we sesh on Wednesdays. So very active in the cannabis community and excited to be branching out and meeting more amazing people as this book starts to go out into the world.
Right. So you have been deeply immersed into the edibles space for quite some time. I could say you're probably a pioneer in the edibles space. And
Thank you.
what initially sparked your interest in infused cuisine?
Well, you honestly, I tell this story in my book, but my mom, when she first told me about my uncles, they left a plate of pot brownies out. My one uncle lives on Kauai, and so she was there visiting them. Didn't tell her that there was anything in the brownies. She ate the entire plate because, like, let's be real, no one eats one brownie, and she did not have a good time. So, but
Right.
she told me that story as like a warning sign. But of course, in my brain, I was like, oh, you can eat weed. I didn't know you could do that. And it was like, I can bypass this whole kind of smoking ritual, which was a little bit intimidating for me when I was younger. And then I was like, oh, I can put it into food, which I had been cooking since I was a little kid. You know, I was 3 when my grandma would put me in front of the pot and be like, stir. So that was really the spark in my brain. And then when I was a senior at Berkeley, I just saw what was out in the market at the time. I had a medical card, and it was like snickerdoodles wrapped in saran wrap, and if there was dosing, it would be like triple X or something. It was like no, or like
Right.
a thousand, whatever. They would just make it up. And I was like, wow, so people can't even eat an entire edible, and they're stale. Everything was stale because no one wants a snickerdoodle that's been sitting around for a month, but when you put pot into it, nobody wants to get rid of it. So everyone's eating crumbs of like overdose small like stale cookies. And I was like, well, listen,
There's
I
got to
have
be a better
something to
way.
say here. There's more we can do with this. It's such a cool plant that you can cook with it in so many different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that when as soon as you have like no one wants to eat the stale edible, but no one also wants to get rid of it. Because I feel like
No.
that is so true. You're like, oh, but there's
Yeah.
weed in it. I don't want to throw it away.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's expensive. It's an
Yeah.
expensive herb. You know, think about what we pay per pound, and then you think about what we pay per pound for other things. We're comparing, it's on par with saffron and other herbs that are very, very expensive by weight. And so we want to be thoughtful when we're cooking with it. We don't want to be wasteful. I mean, I live in a land of plenty, right? There is weed galore in California. This is the epicenter of, we just have the land, we have the history. Humboldt, the Green Triangle has been around forever, not forever, but for
Yeah.
generations. And so
Yeah.
there's a rich history. So I don't need to be stingy, but I do know what it is like to be like, I cannot waste a crumb of this because I don't know when I'm going to get more of it. It's hard, it's more difficult to come by. So that's how I treat it, as a very expensive ingredient. So we need to be thoughtful with how we cook with it. And wonderful thing about edibles is you don't need that much when you're cooking
Right.
with it versus when you're smoking. So from like a stretching your supply mindset, edibles are a great way to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And especially those folks out there who are also using the AVB from their dry herb vaporizer. I mean, that's
Right.
another definite way to stretch your cannabis a little bit
Yes.
further. And I've definitely eaten edibles that probably weren't so fresh just because of that same feeling. So I know, because even if you do have, live in the land of plenty, I'm in Canada. It's been legal here for a while, so there's
Yeah.
no shortage, but you still have to go out
It's
and buy
expensive.
it, decarb it, infuse it, like all those steps. So you want to make it last as long as you can. But just talking about Bong Appetit for a little bit, because you said like it introduced a lot of people to the idea of gourmet cannabis cuisine because it was the first cooking show online around cannabis cuisine. What was the most surprising thing that you learned about weed, cooking with weed while you were working on that show?
Well, I think for me, with Bong Appetit, it was always a challenge of how do we get it into every step of this recipe. It was kind of this competition we would have with ourselves, is how many infusions can we do? So I was always being introduced to the newest products that like concentrate makers were coming up with, whether it was the water soluble cannabinoids, and then there's all of that stuff. I was kind of being introduced to it. But for me, one of the most surprising things, I think, cooking with the leaves, which are super iconic, they don't really hold any potency, right? The trichomes are there to protect the sex organs, the female sex organs, from predators, which doesn't really do a very good job because mine always get covered with bugs. But anyway,
Right.
and now we're the predators, but some people would argue the plant has evolved to attract us. Anyway, so for me, the leaves, I was like, oh, so I can cook with these, and we're not going to really get high, but you have this beautiful, like, it tastes like perilla, and kind of playing with that. You can juice it, you can candy it, you can fry the leaves. And it's kind of looking at it as a plant, not just for getting high or, that effect, but also because it tastes good, and it's a delicious herb, and it makes food taste better. And that's what I learned when I went to Thailand and I was cooking with edible makers and activists in Thailand, is that for generations the Thai people have been using cannabis to make their food taste better. It was the original MSG, like we'll add a little
Right.
bit of weed and then we'll want to eat more of this. So,
Right. That's really cool. And I like
yeah.
that you mentioned the leaves. Like when you're talking about leaves, you're talking like the fan leaves and stuff, not the
Yes.
trim and everything else that we
Not the
typically
sugar
use.
leaf. No, sugar
Right.
leaf will have trichomes on it because again, it's there to protect the flower.
Yeah.
But the fan leaves, not so much. The roots, I cooked with the roots in on Koh Tao in Thailand with KD, and he used them medicinally. It's very good for your bowels, for that IBS and those kind of things. I don't know, if there's probably not any research on that, so don't totally quote me
It's
because
funny you mention that though, because I have been having discussions with people about the root ball, like using the root ball in
yes.
infusions and how they make really good topicals, because
Yeah.
apparently they're really high in certain cannabinoids. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you have
All the
access to the
plants.
plant, you might as well use it all, right?
That was one of the things with cooking on Bong Appetit. I had access to the entire plant. Before that, I was really operating as an edible maker. And so I started with cold water hash, was really when I kind of came on to where my edibles entered the next level of being able to have excellent flavor and a very controlled dose. Much easier to
Right.
do with concentrates than it is to do with flour, because
Yeah.
it's so variable. The flour
Right.
is so
And
variable.
I've been hearing that more and more recently, that people are starting to work more with concentrates just because they can be more potent as well with less,
Yes.
and then it's easier to control the dosing.
Well, you have to think. the amount of trichomes on flour will vary,
Right.
depending, whereas concentrates are just ideally it's just those trichomes, right? So
Right.
depending on the quality of hash or whatever concentrate you're using, you're going to either have more plant matter for a lower grade or less plant matter, and you're really just looking at the heads, right? You just want the
Right.
trichome head for
Yeah.
5-star hash. So but and then within my so that's as an edible maker in the actual California regulated industry, you have to use concentrates. I don't know anyone who is working starting from flour because it would be very difficult to dose accurately, and the cost of failing is very expensive. You have to pay
Right.
to destroy your batch. So you want to be accurate. Now, the trend is for solventless full spectrum. So you're going to be wanting to use concentrates like hash or live rosin, which, water, it's not a solvent. It's you make it cold, so you get, how the cold water hash works.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so as an edible maker, yes, I think that is the best way to dose. For home cooks who might not have access to things like hash, or maybe the laws are stricter if you do get caught holding concentrates. I remember before it was legal in California, if you had concentrates on you, you'd be in a lot of trouble. So I wrote this book for everyone, but also keeping in mind that a lot of people don't have access to things like live rosin.
Right.
Some of my members are in like New Zealand where it's
Yeah.
not legal at all, and they're growing in the middle of the woods. So I try to
Yeah.
be conscious. But then there's also a section in here on cooking with concentrates, and it talks about, it has a chart that says these concentrates are raw. These ones are already decarbed, like RSO or full extract cannabis oil will be ready to go for you. And then all you need to do is have a good milligram scale, which can be one of those little black jewelry scales or a bigger one, so you can weigh your other ingredients too. I recommend one in my book. And then you whisk that concentrate into a warm fat, right? Because
Hmm.
cannabinoids, the resin likes fat
Right.
most of all. If you have a very high proof alcohol, you can use that as well. But fat is the easiest thing to do. Heat it up a little bit, just warm enough to melt the resin into the oil or butter or whatever you're using, and then make sure it's nice and homogenized, no glumps, no clumps of hash or anything, so people don't bite into a cookie and get slipped out of space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just, it's dosing. It's easier to dose because you don't have to, once it's already decarbed for you and you know that potency from a lab,
Hmm.
you can just, there's no calculation of loss, right? There's
Right.
no having to calculate when I convert that THCA, which is the acidic form of THC, into THC, how much loss is going to happen. Automatically already 12.3%. That's what cannabis labs calculate for. Um, and then on top of it, you have to think of loss during the cooking process of, like, there's going to be some batter. Say you're making cookies. There's going to be batter stuck to the bowl. There's going to be batter stuck to the spoon. All of that is going to deplete your overall calculation for THC in the batch. It
Right.
can be,
Yeah.
it's complicated,
Yeah, the
but
math always gets complicated, and I find that's something that
yeah,
people find a little intimidating. And
yes.
I mean, if you're just eating them yourself, that's one thing, but as soon as you start gifting them to people or giving them away, then that's when it really becomes important. But we'll come to back to that in a second,
Sorry.
especially the part about the concentrates, because like I said, I've had a lot more people talking about that recently. But when
Yes.
you are in the process of developing a new infused recipe, where do you even start?
I look for the fat in a recipe. So I'm looking,
Okay.
where can I sneak an infusion in? So what part of this has fat? And some recipes will have fat throughout. So then I go, okay, which part is evenly distributed through
Mhm.
in this dish, right? So say I remember one chef was doing a toffee and she like infused the chocolate, but the chocolate, like if you were to do chocolate chips in a chocolate chip cookie, you wouldn't want to infuse the chocolate chips, even though you could, because there's fat in
Mhm.
chocolate. Because
Right.
how do you guarantee each cookie gets the same amount of chocolate chips?
Right.
You
You
can't.
don't. Yeah.
So you want to infuse the butter in a chocolate chip cookie because then You can weigh it out. You know exactly how much dough is in each cookie. So, oops, sorry, my earbuds. So when I look at a recipe as far as how do I infuse this? How do I turn this into an edible? That's one of the things I consider is that where's there a fat here? If there's not a fat, then I look for, can I put an alcohol in here and in some way cook off the alcohol? Because the alcohol is just kind of it's like a carrier for
Right.
the
Yeah.
cannabinoids. It doesn't really melt into it in the same way that it does in fat. So that's where I'm going to take a tincture and I have a cannabis sugar in my cookbook. And with that sugar, you can make all sorts of things. I haven't tried a meringue though. I'm very curious if the weight of the cannabinoids, the resin will weigh down the egg whites, and so you won't be able to do a meringue because you're
Right.
really right. So that's one
Yeah.
of the ones I've kind of avoided because that's what I think will happen is they're not going to work, but always fun to try.
You'll need to experiment with that and report back
Yes,
and see how it
I
goes.
will.
But yeah. Now, are there any underappreciated ingredients that you find pair exceptionally well with cannabis?
You know, this will sound very American of me, but peanut butter is great. You know, very, very kind of, I don't want to say basic, but you either love peanut butter or you don't.
Yeah.
But the fat in it is really great. I've found, and this is anecdotal, so I haven't done, I wish I could do some research on it and like give people butter versus peanut butter, be like, which one do you feel more? Um, but from my experience as an edible maker, when I put it into peanut butter, people tend to feel the high more. It almost makes it more bioavailable. But don't, again, like no studies done on that. That's just been
Right. Some
my
anecdotal
feedback.
evidence. Yeah.
Yes, is like holy cow, those peanut butter cups really
Yeah.
smacked, you know?
Yeah.
So
And it goes really well with chocolate too. And like
yes,
it's a nice ingredient as well because it will mask the taste of
yes,
cannabis if you're not looking for that flavor. So,
yes.
peanut butter, I love peanut butter. Nut,
Me
any
too.
most nut
Any nut
butters.
butter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I usually don't buy almond butter because I like it too much and
You eat the whole thing. Yeah.
I do. Yeah. So I'm like, maybe if I just don't buy it, I'll be fine. But
That's how I do it too. I'm like, I
yeah.
just won't buy this. And then
Yeah.
it's
It's like
like
an
maybe
occasional treat.
Nutella.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
can't have that.
Yeah. Now, do strains even matter when it comes to edibles? And how would you say that the home cook should work with terpenes and in what context? And I know you talk a bit about this in the intro of your book as well.
It's a loaded question.
Yes. That's why I
People
asked it.
are
Yeah.
very, and no one can prove it, right? How do you prove that terpenes, when you eat them, they can't even prove it when we smoke them. Now, people will argue like that's bullshit, and I hear them on that. But when we eat a food, we're also eating terpenes aren't just in cannabis, they're in our food as well.
Right.
So how do we control that? How much of a terpene when we eat it is going to actually have an impact? So I guess my question would be for you, what do you mean by do strains even matter? Do you mean as far as flavor, or do you mean as far as the effects of the edible?
I'm probably first and foremost the effects, but
Yeah.
also the flavor, because I do see a lot of folks that will like use certain cultivars in a recipe and say, the terpenes will lend itself well to this recipe. But then I'm like,
What do you
don't
mean?
Yeah, like, don't they all kind of through the whole process of decarb and infusing and baking and eating, like, what's left of that terpene at that point?
I think it's an excellent question. It's definitely something that I've investigated as an edible maker to the extent that I can. I with it becoming more legal, hopefully we'll be able to have studies. Although I've thought about it, I'm like, how would we figure this out? Like, if they actually do have an impact when we eat them. It just, for me, our bodies are so complicated. When we smoke, it's one thing, it's going into our lungs and then into our bloodstream, into our brain.
Mhm.
When we eat it, some of it will sublingually get into our system, but then it has to go into our stomach, and then our liver starts metabolizing it. And like you said, there's before that decarboxylation, which these terpenes are very volatile. So how are you going to be preserving all of them through that process? Okay, then we're looking at doing a sous vide decarb, using sous vide to decarb to protect those terpenes, which some of them are still pretty volatile and will still evaporate.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and you smell it when you decarb. You can smell them. And then during the baking process, let's say you don't bake, you make a salad. You make a salad dressing, sure, okay. But then in that salad, maybe you put some lemon juice in that dressing too. Now, is the limonene in the lemon going to have an impact as well? Like, I don't eat a lemon meringue pie and all of a sudden feel excited, even if I put a bunch of THC and other cannabinoids in it.
Right.
The
Yeah.
terpenes are the same, no matter if they're coming from cannabis or if they're coming from a lemon or if they're coming from rosemary. So I think you get into this tricky business of trying to, and that's not even taking into consideration how unique we are as individuals, right?
Mhm.
So you might not be able to eat chocolate after 4 p.m. because some of the compounds in chocolate might just, excite you too much. Maybe the anandamide in chocolate, which is also endocannabinoid that we make,
Mhm.
the bliss molecule,
Yes.
maybe that you're just too blissed out. You can't do it. I can eat
Right.
chocolate at any point. I could wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and eat chocolate and then go right back to bed. So we're all different with our bodies. And I think when you start trying to prescribe people an effect with your edibles, you're giving yourself too much credit. That's what I think.
Right.
However, strains are not just defined by terpenes. There's other compounds in them, and some strains like Farm Cut has this royal blueberry, and it's a 1-to-1 CBD to THC. If you're looking at the cannabinoids in
Right.
a strain or a cultivar, then yes, that is something to take into consideration as far as how it's going to affect you, like how much THCV, like these new kind of minor cannabinoids that we're finding outside of THC and CBD. We have CBG, we have CBN, and now that one is one that you do not want if you're trying to stay awake, right?
Right.
So
It's gonna give you the
C-
couch lock.
CBN is degraded THC. What happens is the hydrogen and THC binds with oxygen in the air to make H2O, aka water. And what we're left with is CBN, which is not great if you want to party, and I wouldn't serve it at like a cannabis, like I wouldn't serve CBN at a Bong Appetit dinner party.
Right.
I would give it to someone who's like, I can't go to sleep at night. Like, try a CBN edible, something light, and figure out what dose works for you. So in that sense, and that wouldn't be strain specific, right? CBN can happen in any cultivar. So
Right.
it's really, for
So
me, that's what I focus on,
yeah, so
cannabinoids.
basically it's the difference between terpenes and cannabinoids. The terpenes don't matter as much necessarily. The cannabinoids obviously do.
Do.
As a full CBD infusion obviously is going to have a very different effect than something THC, THCV, or any of these other minor cannabinoids.
And how they're all mixed together. Now,
Yeah.
as far as like the entourage effect with all of those terpenes in the does that impact our how we feel an edible? I cannot speak to that because it is so complicated. I don't think anybody really can at this point. And I've looked into it. I know there are people who are trying to prove that.
Right.
Good luck to them. I hope they figure it out.
Yeah,
Until
it
then,
is. It's tricky though, because I see even in like the dispensaries, you go in and you look at the edibles and they'll be like a sativa edible or an indica edible.
but that's
I'm like,
already so
it's,
binary,
I
right?
know, and
Because
kind of
sativa and
bullshit, but
it's bullshit because
yeah,
sativa and indica, first of all, they have been spliced and diced so many times by these cultivators that no one can really say they have a pure sativa, pure indica. It's pretty much all hybrids. Now, there are some people who've really preserved those genetics, and more power to them, but that's not what you're getting from these edible makers that are stamping indica and sativa on their edibles. So for me, it's too binary, and I think it's, people will again expect a certain effect from taking that indica edible, and I don't like to take that kind of responsibility on, like, you're going to
mhm,
feel this way. I'm like, no, you're going to feel high. The
right,
edible high,
yeah,
it
yeah,
feels different than the smoking high. It lasts longer, it feels stronger, might be more of like a body kind of. Everyone's different. Everyone's
right,
I can eat edibles and do an hour of yoga. Other
yeah,
people eat edibles and they can't leave the couch.
yeah.
So
Well, a lot of the times that's also going to depend on the dosing as well. You know, if I'm going to
Yes.
do yoga, I'm going to do a lighter dose than if I'm,
Yes.
flaking out on the couch watching a show. There's obviously different doses for different occasions as well. But
That's
is
right.
there a time when you might want to look at the terpenes in a particular cultivar? And because I've always wondered as well if I infused raw cannabis into an olive oil once, and I suppose if you tried that with different cultivars, maybe that would preserve some of the terpenes. But of course, you're using that more for
The flavor.
flavor, yeah.
But you
Then
would get some, like, you don't need to decarboxylate it all the way. That's for the
right,
high. So if you're really trying to preserve some of those terpenes more, you would get that flavor, of course.
right,
And
yeah,
so when I cook with cannabis, that's definitely something I consider, like with marigold sweets. Um, I'm wanting to use something for a caramel that is going to have more of those fruity notes to it. Like Sonoma Hills Farm has this cherry cheesecake that they're gonna let me use some rosin for my next batch. And that is going to lend those terpenes to that. Just like when we go and pick mint or thyme, there's different types of mint and thyme. There's chocolate, there's
mhm,
all sorts, right? English thyme, whatever. Depending on the recipe, I'm going to use different flavors in it. So there are savory and sweet recipes in this cookbook. There are some terpenes and some cultivars that really are versatile, that you don't have to worry about anything with lemon, like super lemon haze. Like the flavor is going to be good. I wouldn't use anything skunky or gassy per se.
right,
Great for smoking. I love to smoke those kind of strains, but when you're cooking with it, you're going to get those flavors, especially when you're dosing it potently.
right.
I dose lightly, but if you're really trying to pack a punch, you're going to get more of those flavors as well. So you want to be considering the terpenes in the
Would that
cultivar.
also maybe apply to some of the ones that smell like, I don't know, some of the cheesy strains? Or I have a friend that loves like the piss strains,
I know it's
the
so
ones that
gross to
smell really
smoke.
gross, but
Yeah, they smack.
yeah,
They really, like, you smoke them and you're like, whoa,
yeah,
they smell for a reason. That plant is like, get the hell away from my
right,
flower. you know.
yeah,
So I get, from a cooking perspective, I try to go with strains that I know are going to taste good as well, because
right,
it will impact the flavor. But I don't focus on it too heavily, if I'm being
right.
honest. I personally do not feel a difference when I use different strains. I just always, most of the strains I'm using are high THC. Now, if I were to
Mhm,
use something that had more CBD or something else, maybe I'd feel a difference. I would just probably not feel as stoned. But
right.
I'm not as sensitive as some people. Some people swear by, I only do Blue Dream edibles, or and whatever works for them, then stick with what works for you.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that for sure,
Of
but I
course.
always love to ask people this question because it is a little
It's tricky.
controversial, but well, maybe
Yes.
controversial is not the right. I mean, if that's the kind of controversy we're dealing with in the cannabis industry, then I think we're doing all right, but
We're doing
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you talk about something interesting around decarboxylation
Yeah.
that I was sort of this was new for me. And
Oh.
so I hope we can talk about how you like to make a paper pouch when it comes to decarbing and
Okay.
why you like to do that. Because this is something, like I said, this is a new concept for me, but it makes sense.
So more so than the paper pouch, I'm just trying, like I explained, that CBN process,
Mhm.
you're trying to get rid of oxygen from the equation. If you take oxygen out of the equation, you don't have to worry about degrading your THC. The most obvious way of doing that is using a sous vide to, heat it very slowly. To protect the sticky resin from sticking to the sous vide bag, I use parchment paper, and I just
Mhm.
create a little parchment pouch. If I'm doing it in the oven, it'll go into a stasher bag, which is, that brand is oven safe, which is why I'm saying it. I'm not
Those are
sponsoring them.
the reusable
And
silicone bags?
it's
Yeah.
the stasher brand specifically is safe in the oven up to a certain temperature, and
Mhm.
decarb temperature is safe. So I roll those up, smash as much oxygen out as air as out as possible, and then put it in the oven, like with the pouch, the parchment pouch in the
Mhm.
silicone. If I didn't put parchment, I'm trying not to waste any of those trichomes, right? I don't want any of them to stick to that silicone, and it will
Right.
as it heats up, it will. And over time, I'm sure if you use your stasher without parchment or use whatever without parchment, you could see that resin built up. Like as you trim plants, you get the hash on your hands. It just takes
Yeah.
time to see those tiny little trichomes. Um, it's kind of a protection thing. It's being a little bit more precious than just throwing it onto a pan and tossing it in the oven, because that's really going to expose it to oxygen and heat, like blasts of heat, which is where you're going to get that CBN.
Right.
So it's like an extra step. Again, it's an expensive herb. Is it totally necessary? You're probably fine skipping it, but I just like to kind of give this plant the respect that it deserves at what the price that it costs, because
Well,
it's
I like that idea too, because sometimes people do find that when they make edibles, it can make them sleepy, and that could just be
yes.
because, you know, it's being degraded and converting into that CBN, which is maybe not what they're looking for. And this
Yeah.
little extra step might help them avoid that process and make their edibles more impactful and less tired, like make them less
And
tired.
they might be using old weed too. I think people
Right.
kind of hold on to flower and they're like, oh, I'll just make some edibles out of this. And it might be a year or two old, and then they're still decarbing. Decarboxylation will happen the minute that plant gets cut down, or if it's just left to die in the in the woods
Right.
or whatever. It will start decarboxylating, because
Right.
THC is the stable form. THCA is acidic. So it's going to start
Right.
that decarboxylation process at room temperature. We just want to speed it up because we don't want to wait around, and we want to convert as much of that THCA as possible because we're trying to get as much high as possible.
Right.
So they might already have THC, like a good amount, and then they're decarbing it still, and then it's degrading it to CBN. So I think there's there's different ways to kind of protect and store flower, so you're going to avoid those things. And then there's times to just kind of look at some bud and just be like, hey, this is my sleepy time weed, and I'm gonna make
Right.
something to go to bed,
Yeah.
and just be aware of that process
So
as
would
well.
people in that particular instance then be better off like decarbing, and then like if they have a lot of weed that they're going to make edibles with it eventually anyway, would they be better off decarbing it first and then storing it decarbed already instead of to avoid some of
Mm,
that degradation that you're talking about?
And that's a good question. I would have to do lab testing on it. My instinct is no. My
Okay.
instinct would to just kind of, they'd have to like plan. They'd have to be like, okay,
Right.
this weed, most people just kind of forget that they have some weed, and they're like, I'm gonna throw it into some butter and make some edibles with it. We can run more experiments on it. That's all I'm about. I love running experiments. This whole
Yeah.
book was like hundreds of experiments that I just was like, I don't know. I guess I'll I'll run some testing on it. I think that's the best place we can come from, is like staying curious and being able to say, well, I don't know. So why don't we
Right.
investigate and see what would be the best way to go about that?
Yeah, I'd be curious about that myself just because I do tend to decarb, like not huge amounts, but larger amounts so that I have
Batch.
it decarbed ready for when I want to make an infusion, because I like it just cuts down the time if you can like do a batch and
I
then
get
you have it
that.
ready to use. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the best thing you could do is decarb and infuse at the same time, because then you
Right.
have that oil around it. And I found I did run testing on infusion and decarboxylation at the same time. And it protects the cannabinoids. So it takes a lot longer for it to decarb
Right.
once it's submerged in a fat. Um, which for me, I'm trying to cut time. I think you're like me in that you don't like to spend like hours stirring a pot on the stove.
No, I don't.
If you can take half that time, you will.
Yeah.
And that's where this book is coming from, is like, I want to know, are there shortcuts, are there ways for me to do it faster? Does it make sense to decarboxylate and infuse at the same time? To me it doesn't, because you're going to be putting that plant matter in a fat and heating it in that fat, just like tea gets bitter as you steep it for a
Right.
long time,
Yep.
you're going to pull more of that chlorophyll, more of those bitter plant flavors, not just the terpenes, all of the other stuff that's in the cannabis plant into that oil while you're decarbing. You probably could infuse and then continue to decarb after you take the plant matter out. But
Mhm.
again, it's just like taking longer for me, in
Yeah.
my opinion, for no reason.
Right.
Um, so that's something to consider is like if you're going to do a batch decarb, do a batch infusion right after, and you're going
Mhm.
to look at this book, and you're going to see how long it takes to infuse, and it's going to blow your mind. You're going to be like,
Yeah,
I
because
don't
some of
know
those
how
were
you've been doing
shorter.
it.
Well, I
Sorry?
admitted I said a lot of your infusion times were shorter than what I was accustomed to, and admittedly, I do have infusion devices at home as well, just from doing this show for however many years, but,
Right.
I mean, that changes how you might set the temperatures on some of those devices too, based on some of these, like, tests that you
Well,
were running, what you were finding. The
I found
longer
it
isn't necessarily better. That's basically what you were finding, that you don't extract more THC from your
long
cannabis.
infusions.
Yeah, yeah,
And
which is counterintuitive almost.
I think that was one of the biggest things that from writing this book, and this was really brought on from my club, the Edibles Club, was they, you know, at them, my patrons asking me questions, me not being able to answer them, and I'm like, well, I'm going to find out. And so, and me asking questions on Bong Appetit, and then people not being able to tell me, and then I'm like, well, we need to find this, we need to figure this out.
Right.
And so that was one of the biggest things, and how quickly butter infuses. Um, 50% of that infusion happens in the first 30 seconds. So
Yeah, that's
it
wild. Like,
is it a
that
straight line? You're
30
not going to get
seconds. Yeah,
you're not going to get the rest of the 50% in the next 30 seconds. It takes longer for that other potency to come out, but you don't need to do it for 2 days. Like some of the recipes I see online are like 9 hours in a crock pot. I'm like, at that point, you're just
yeah.
making soup. Like you're making a green sludge.
Well, and it does end up looking really green as
Yes,
well, the results, and I think people associate that green color with more potent
potency, and it's
infusions.
not.
Right.
I
Yes,
don't look
so
at green. I don't look at green cold water hash and think this is a better hash. Our goal is the same as when making hash. We're trying to strip the trichomes off. That's it.
right.
For me personally, I know that some people want the other compounds in the cannabis plant because they believe that it has other health benefits, etc. I am not of that school. I am in the school of getting people high. I'm not a medical professional, so I don't really dole out advice on that kind of stuff other than, hey, this I've heard it helps you sleep, and I heard
Right.
it helps with pain, and
Yeah,
it's a fun time.
yeah,
So for me, it's really like, how do I do this quickly? And from a flavor perspective, how do I make sure this tastes good? Well, I don't let it steep in the butter or the oil, or make a tincture for 30 days. I ran lab testing on that. I did a room temperature tincture and a tincture made in the freezer to see what, and I shook it every day and did all of this stuff. It does not matter. That time is not the variable. It's temperature, and it is agitation. And for alcohol, it's going to be the proof that you use, the
right.
amount of ethanol, because ethanol is the solvent. And for butters and oils, the butter is acting as the solvent. The
Mhm.
trichomes, like the butter, just melting it right off the plant. So how do we help it melt? We stir it up, we agitate it. And that's what they'll do in a lab, is they'll, for alcohol, they get those jewelry. I almost considered putting this in the book. They get those jewelry cleaners
Mhm.
and they put ethanol in it. And then you can put whatever, decarbed flour with the shake, supersonic shaking, whatever agitator. It will shake all of those trichomes off into the ethanol. So if you really wanted to
Right.
like take another, you could get a jewelry cleaner and do it that way.
Yeah.
So for me, I just wanted people to understand what the goal is here. The goal from my book and from my perspective is get those trichomes off. And then from there, you want to keep doing stuff with that plant matter by all means. knock yourself out. Throw it into some meatballs, throw it into whatever you want.
But that also, I guess, means that when somebody is using, whether they're doing it on the stove or in a device, if they can change the temperature on the device, not necessarily the temperature, but the time, then it might be worth considering doing that.
The device, as long as it's agitating. That's my
Right.
problem with the device. If it's just sitting there and your plant isn't moving, that means those, like, you have, like, I think of it like I'm say you're washing, that's how we describe it, washing, like you're washing your
Yeah.
hat. You're
Yeah.
trying to wash those trichomes off. You don't wash, your washing machine doesn't sit still, right? It
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it moves. Why
Right.
would it move? So that those molecules, so the atoms, whatever, if you want to
Yeah.
get really sciencey, so they melt off, they shake off,
Yeah.
so it gets them off of the plant.
So
So that's my
basically,
problem.
if someone's looking for a device, then they should look for one that includes some agitation when it's infusing.
If you like a
Probably.
device, I
Yeah.
talk about this in the book too. I don't like a single use device.
Yeah.
For me, a double boiler is, I can make that at home and it works just as well. And since it doesn't take it's not taking me hours to infuse. It's only taking me, like, I think for the butter, it took 30, what did I say? 30 minutes or 40
Mhm.
minutes? 30 minutes, right? I don't want to have to set up a whole device, and my kitchen is tiny. I don't want to have another thing in my kitchen personally, but I understand people like to kind of set something and forget it and go on. If there is a feature that it will agitate, that will help. If you have a
Right.
slow cooker, so you want to set your crock pot to a certain temperature, and because you don't want to have to worry about a flame on the stove, although the point of a double boiler is the water keeps the temperature static,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, just stir it. Just make sure you're stirring it.
So
You
that's
want
all
to
you need to do is to
yeah,
stir. Okay.
heat, agitation, fat. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. Then squeeze as much of the butter out of the flour as you can. You're not going to be able to get it all out. Some people like get press, they go really extreme to try and get every drop of butter out.
Yeah.
Knock yourself out. There will be a little bit of potency left in the butter because it's physically impossible to get every drop out. So you can use it. It's not going to have too much, but if you're really sensitive, you can throw it into something. Just try to pick recipes when you're using flour straight, and some of my recipes in the book do that. You want to make sure you're using a recipe with a lot of other flavors and
Right.
textures. Like I
Right.
say meatballs because meatballs have garlic and parmesan and
Yeah.
ricotta and all of these other delicious, and tomato sauce, all of these things where you're not going to be like, am I eating weed? If
Right.
I put it into a snickerdoodle, I just throw some refuse butter, buttery weed into a snickerdoodle, I'm going to bite into that and be like, gross,
Yeah.
because there's too much else to distract your
Right.
palate from
No,
the
meatballs
plant.
is definitely a perfect example, and back to the peanut butter too, because peanut butter is just
Yeah.
such a strong flavor that it's gonna mask that cannabis taste.
Firecrackers. That's where
Yes.
firecrackers come in with that AVB. And
Right.
AVB will have a little bit of CBN. It depends, right? Depends how
Yeah.
old your flower was when you first vaped it. But some on Reddit, someone posted lab results from AVB, and it had, there was a little bit of THC in it, it was a little bit decarbed, and that's kind of the same idea of using weed that's already been infused into
Right.
butter. There'll be a little bit of potency there, so just throw it into something with, like, yeah, peanut butter
Yeah.
or
Yeah, which is super easy to do.
garlic. Yeah.
But, I mean, you kinda already touched on this before, but how do you approach cooking with concentrates? Because once again, I've had a lot of people asking about that recently.
I love cooking with concentrates. That's really what set me apart as an edible maker, was getting my hands on some cold water hash. Decarboxylation was not even a word I knew at the time, and it wasn't a word online. This is like 2010, right? So
Right.
I figured it out. I don't know how. I put it in the oven. I was like, oh, look, it's bubbling. Oh, that's interesting. And then I put it into my caramel, and people were like, oh, this felt really good. It felt stronger. And I was like, great.
Right.
I can stretch my hash a little bit by heating it up beforehand and then putting it into the caramel, because the caramel would decarb the hash a little bit without
Mhm.
pre-decarbing it, because it goes up to a high enough temperature, but doing it a little bit beforehand helped. So cooking with concentrates, they're potent. You need a milligram scale. There's no using one of those basic kitchen scales. It has to be
Right.
a milligram scale.
Yes.
You can use a jewelry scale. You can get one of the bigger ones that I have that they use in labs. I like them because you can measure your flour, like cannabis flour, and your flour, like baking flour, all on the
Hmm.
same machine. Again, I'm big on less machines in my house just because I don't have enough space. Um, and then knowing the potency, if it's not decarbed or not, there's kind of a lot to think about when you're cooking with concentrates. It depends on the concentrate that you're using. That's why I put a chart in the book that's like, this is the average potency. This is whether or not you need to decarboxylate. And just trying to dose responsibly. There's a chapter called A Formula for an Ethical Dose, and it's like the first thing I said in this conversation. No one eats one brownie. So it's really considering how
Yes.
much of something someone's going to eat and giving them the grace to be able to eat more of something if they
Right.
want to.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of that too, just because I know myself and that's how I am. I never eat just one. I want
No
to eat
one
two.
does. It's
Yeah.
insulting when you see a bag of chips and they're like serving size, 5 chips. I'm like, who?
Right. Yeah, I know, right? Nobody
Who?
eats 5 chips. It's
No.
ridiculous. Yeah. So as far as cooking with concentrates, then there are certain ones that you would decarb. You mentioned like the RSO and FICO, you wouldn't need to decarb because it's already been decarbed. And then
Through the process.
you could just use some of that concentrate in a fat, mix it up really well, and then you use, or you could probably also put it right in some recipes too. Could you not?
You just want to make sure you homogenize it because it's
Right.
so potent. So you want to
Yeah.
make sure it's being distributed evenly throughout the recipe. So like if you were to do, and
I'm
I talk
thinking
about,
candies, like I find they lend themselves well to candies. Would you find that that's one you could add concentrates to pretty directly?
dep- yeah, it depends on the candy. Most like gummies and things like that will still homogenize it into a coconut oil to make sure it's
Right.
not gonna like stay in a clump in
Right.
the candy, or MCT oil, whatever they want to use. Caramel has a lot of fat in it, so I could just plop it right into the pot while it's cooking, but just for my peace of mind of knowing that it's evenly distributed, I still whisk it into a warm butter. Some people will use um uh lecithin. I
Mhm.
don't love the taste of lecithin, and I haven't really seen anything that is convincing that it helps bioavailability other than like what people say. I haven't like seen studies. I understand the thought process behind why it's believed to increase bioavailability, but I haven't seen any convincing studies that are proving
Right.
that
Yeah.
it does that. For cannabinoids, which are operating on our CB1, CB2 receptors, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not quite there for me yet to be like, yes, put lecithin, put lecithin in. I think it can help to distribute it, or
Mhm.
it's an emulsifier, so it's going to help
Right. Which is
with
sort of how I've used it before as an emulsifier, not
as an
necessarily
emulsifier.
for bioavailability, though I have
Right.
heard that lots of times, but it's hard to know when you're eating something
Is
if
it
it's
more
more
available?
is it more available or
Exactly.
not than the other thing that I made? I don't know.
Don't know.
I'm
Don't
high,
know.
so I
That's
mean,
right.
yeah,
That's
mission
how I feel
accomplished.
about it. I
Yeah,
think though with like some drinks, if you wanted to use a lecithin, I just personally don't like the flavor of it. I
right.
find I've tried like I soy, and I've tried the sunflower lecithin, and I find it gives it kind of like this dusty flavor, which is
Mm.
not super appealing to me, but to each their own. Um, what were we talking about?
Oh, just concentrates? I think I was asking about
Oh,
putting them in candy in particular, but
yeah.
yeah,
And so like distillate is a pretty common concentrate that people use, and that's going to be just distilled cannabinoids. It's not going to be full
yeah,
spectrum. Um, and then there's also like things that are using BHO, like
right.
live resin, which is using the flash frozen flour, but it's resin, so it's washing it with butane or ethanol,
Mhm.
whatever they want to solvent that they want to
Yeah,
use. And
yeah,
some people have problems with those solvents. It's kind of like the seed oil discussion.
Yeah, I'm familiar with
Interestingly
that
enough,
discussion.
right? It's
Yeah,
complicated, right?
yeah,
I personally use seed oils all the time and haven't seen anything
right.
convincing otherwise. I think everything in moderation and like, you know, I don't think eating tallow is somehow going to be better for me. But kind of that same idea with concentrates, people have a problem with using butane to strip those terpene or trichomes off, and but it has benefits, right? It preserves those terpenes better. They get like
Mhm.
terpier concentrates when they use butane. So there's always, there's pros and cons with everything. For my brand, because of the ethos of Marigold Sweets, I use solventless, full
Right,
spectrum, single strain, so I can tell people if people are very, I only like this strain, I can say, well, this is the strain I'm using.
right. Well, and I
So
think too with the BHO, people are just have that concern as to like obviously you don't want to have any residual
that's the
solvents left
concern,
over, and that's the main concern I would think with using that.
right?
Otherwise, I mean, have at it. It's going to be
I
great. But
It's complicated. I know, because
yeah,
I don't know what to say to people. Like my instinct is to say like, yeah, let's not, we don't know if we're going to burn off all of that BHO and there's not going to be, like you said, residual solvents. But
right.
um sorry, my dog found her sloth. I'm going to have
Uh,
to take it from her and hide it.
yeah, that
Um
I can hear it a little bit. But
I'm sorry.
I mean, switching gears a little bit because, I mean, we're obviously talking about concentrates, which can give you a pretty potent edible if you want to go that direction. And I do have listeners that definitely prefer high potency edibles, but I also know a lot of people that are really sensitive and low dose and microdosed edibles. I'm hearing talked about a lot more now as well. And do you see this as a trend shaping the future of cannabis edibles moving forward?
1,000%. That's my book, How to Eat Weed, Have a Good Time. It's that
Right.
second part of the book is about microdosing. I've met so many people that don't touch edibles because one time they had a bad experience because someone threw like an ounce into a stick of butter and they're like, I don't know, I could smoke, I smoke this much, I'll just do that and put it into a
Right.
dozen cookies. I've done that. I've dosed myself too heavily before, and it is
I've
not
done
a
it to
good
myself
time,
too. Yeah.
right? It feels
Yeah.
like the walls are melting and like you're never going to feel normal again.
Yeah.
And every kind of anxiety
That heart
comes.
attack feeling, which is not a good
Yes.
time.
No, it's not
Yeah.
a good time. And so microdosing, because edibles take longer to kick in than smoking, when we smoke, that feeling happens pretty quickly. With edibles, because we have to go through all of these systems in our body, right? Our stomach, first we're going to eat it, then we got to swallow it and go down our stomach, and then our liver's got to do this whole thing. People are impatient. We're used
Yep.
to, we're used to taking a shot and feeling drunk. And I mean, for me, I'm like, pretty quickly shot and I'm like, woo.
Yeah.
um because edibles take longer, people kind of get cocky, and they also they taste good.
Yeah.
Hopefully they taste good.
Yeah. And then you're like, I want another one.
That's
Yeah.
right. So and you're like, well, I don't feel anything, I'll be fine, and you kind
It's
of
what
underestimate.
yeah. I feel like it's that these edibles ain't shit kind of mentality
That's it.
because they just don't know and they're like, it's nothing's gonna happen. And then it happens.
Yeah, because a cookie is disarming. You're like,
Yeah.
this cookie's not going to do anything to me. Whereas like a fiery shot or something given to you by like a rough and tumble bartender, you're like, ooh, you kind of know what you're in for. A cookie doesn't usually mean, being glued to the couch. So, as edible makers, and especially as this plant becomes more and more legal in more states and in more countries, we have a responsibility to dose people ethically and to do it with consideration. I think that really comes down to education and understanding things like what's in this book, like how many milligrams on average are in a gram of weed. Okay,
Mhm.
weed is going to have about 200 milligrams of THC after decarboxylation. That's what we're looking at. A lot of people can't have more than 5 milligrams. So we're talking about 40 doses in 1 gram of flour. And people
Right.
will throw in an eighth. And I get that mindset. You're like, it's it's not even, it's nothing. It's a gram. That's nothing. Okay, well, it's not nothing. It's a lot. So microdosing first starts with understanding the potency of the ingredient that you're cooking with. And then also taking into consideration, because this is something that is delicious and people want to eat more of, how many cookies or how many meatballs or how many handfuls of popcorn is someone going to eat, and then dosing it based on that serving size. Okay, if I know someone is going to eat at least 3 cookies, I want these cookies to maybe be 1.5 milligrams each. So,
Right.
that
Yeah.
compound, and then someone doesn't have to feel bad if they ate 3 cookies,
Yeah.
because we're human.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I've taken the track now to infuse the cookies or whatever I'm making to my dose so that I don't eat more than one, because I have a horrible sweet tooth. So that's my method, because I have eaten too many before and then been like, why did I do that? I knew how strong they were, but yeah.
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 I don't have that self-control. So I'm just honest with myself. Like,
Right.
I made brownies the other day, and they pack a punch. And so but I can eat 3 of them and
Right.
still go about my day. And
Yeah,
that's
and
how
that's
I
nice
like it.
too, because then you can tailor the dose that you're consuming in one session to what you have to do. Like, are you going to eat 3 brownies if you have to run a bunch of errands? Maybe you'll just need one in that instance.
Yeah.
So it gives you more flexibility with what
A
you're doing.
microdose.
Yeah,
Yes, you can
yeah,
always eat more of them. And if you want to be healthy about it, say you're like, okay, you don't want to eat too many cookies. Cannabis can go in anything.
yeah.
I've got a hummus recipe in here. Make yourself some hummus and you can get stoned and have like a healthy, I don't know, go for a walk or something, or make
Right.
trail mix and go for a hike, be out in nature. I think the thinking outside of the brownie is good.
Yes.
And if you want to kind of tailor, this book will teach you how to infuse everything. If you
Right.
are gluten free, if you are vegan, the basis, there are recipes for everyone, but the basic information you're going to get in the beginning of the book, which is how to infuse quickly, how to decarb in different ways, that can be applied to any recipe.
Right. Now, are there any misconceptions about cannabis edibles that you wish would die?
Well, I think we've kind of covered it as far as the indica versus sativa binary.
Right.
I think that's kind of a very simplified way of looking at it. I also think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't do edibles. I'll just smoke a joint and eat a cookie. And I'm like, well, you don't know what the difference is between delta 9 THC and 11 hydroxy THC. And that's okay, but don't come into our lane. Let us do what we do. You
Right.
do what you do.
Yeah.
Um, like, they're just totally different things. So it's not as simple as I'll just bake a batch of cookies and smoke a joint. It's like, fine, you'll be smoking
Yeah.
another joint in 15 minutes. Whereas if I
Exactly.
had an infused cookie, I'd be stoned for hours, which
Right.
is my goal.
Yeah.
So
And that's what I like too. But
yeah.
now, just as we're getting to the close today, a couple more questions around just navigating the cannabis industry as a woman. Have you had any particular challenges?
I don't know anyone else who's like, maybe I'm sure other women in the industry or in sciences can talk about this. And I'm not a scientist. I'm a cookbook, I'm a cookbook author. I'm very curious. I ran a lot of lab tests for this book. And I have a lot of bros who are just like, let me see the white papers when I say things like, oh,
The
pecan
white
butter.
paper.
I'm like, are
Okay.
you serious? Like,
Right.
I would love that. I would love for this to be studied on that level. I think for a cookbook, this is pretty groundbreaking. The information that's in here, I'm trying to help home cooks so they're not wasting time, so they're being efficient and they're dosing responsibly. I think that people kind of get prickly about this because they've been in this industry that's been kind of stayed hidden for a long time, and everyone thinks they know everything about this topic, this plant. And here I am coming in and I'm like, hi, no, you actually don't need to infuse that long. And for some reason, it pisses people off. Men,
Right.
pisses
Right.
bros off.
Yeah.
I very rarely have a woman coming in my comments and being like, you don't know anything.
I hear that not just in the cannabis industry, but sort of
No.
across industries as well, that it's women are typically very supportive.
Yes,
Typically,
I
generally, yeah. Yeah.
generally, and then usually I get mansplained too by guys, and I'm
Yeah.
like, this is literally what I do. I've spent the better part of 5 years researching and trying to answer these questions to the best of my capability. Do I wish there were two or three other people that's what it would take to be a real scientific study, right? Is to
Right.
have it pure tested, and who else is doing what I'm doing? I invite them to come and do it and further prove this is right. I ran the test multiple times, right? I
Right.
didn't just do butter and go, okay, this is what happened. I was so surprised by the results on infusion of butter. I ran it 3 times, and like each time I was like, okay, I don't know enough. I need to do the test more thoroughly. I need to test the
Right.
flour after. I need to do this. I need to make sure we're restarting the butter every time so I'm not pulling from, like really expensive and kooky, like obsessive. So it's a little
Right.
insulting when these guys who've never did any testing ever
Right.
are like, let me see this. I'm like, no,
Yeah. Yeah.
buy my
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I've been making edibles I've had this show for 5 years. I've started making edibles before that. I discovered them later in life, but I'm always learning new things and I learn new things from your book too. So
Thank
that's,
you. I'm always learning new
yeah.
things, and
Yeah.
that's how we should stay. We should stay
Right.
curious.
Yes. Always be
And
learning. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Now, Vanessa, what would surprise people about you?
What would surprise people about me? Ooh. Uh, I know I saw that question. I was like, I don't know what would be surprising about me. I'm pretty opinionated, so I feel like people know most of how I feel about things. Oops, I really thought I had an answer for this. And what
I
is
mean, if you
surprising?
don't, maybe there's a hobby that you have or something that would surprise people. I've had a few people mention hobbies that would be like, oh, you're into that. That's surprising, but
I guess chess. I don't think that
okay.
I just got into chess, so don't hold me to that.
Oh,
But
no, not at all.
I love puzzles. I love chess. Very into learning new languages, and
Oh,
so that's
cool.
when I say like I like to be a student.
Yeah,
I'm always trying to learn something new and challenge myself in that way, because we can kind of get stuck in our box, and we don't learn new skills
right.
or
What language are
with
you learning?
well, I've been learning Spanish for a long time because I'm
Okay.
in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
Studied French for a while, but it's the accent is killer.
tough. Yeah,
Italian, obviously, but right now Spanish is the one that I really want to feel conversational enough.
right.
I'm kind of there. I'm in Los Angeles. I feel like you should speak Spanish.
Yeah, and you probably have lots of opportunities to practice. And
Yes.
I feel you on all that stuff because I'm learning German.
Ooh.
And that's because I have a couple of German friends, so I can speak with them. It's a lot slower than I had anticipated when I started years ago, but
It
it's good for the
takes
brain.
time.
It does.
It's
Yeah.
time. And it is
Yeah.
good for the brain. I think that's one of the things that I've learned when I was younger. I used to work with, elderly, and just keeping your brain active, staying moving a
Yeah.
lot. I definitely, I think probably exercise, like health. I try not to be too much in that lane because people are really kooky about that right now.
Mhm.
But exercise, keeping your brain active, food is medicine, cannabis is medicine. So all of that kind of works together in a healthy lifestyle. So
Yeah.
that's how I see it.
Well, Vanessa, you have written a beautiful book. I have my copy here too. And
Yay!
I there's so many recipes I want to try. The peach creamsicles really
Ooh.
spoke to me, and maybe that's because I've been, coming through a cold, dark winter and I'm thinking of
Yeah.
spring and summertime. But you've written a beautiful book. And where can people find you out in the world?
I am on Instagram, Vanessa Marigold, same on Threads. Vanessa Marigold on YouTube, and that's where all the fun stuff happens because YouTube is actually more open to cannabis
Yes.
than Meta.
Yes.
I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter, but I don't, let's not support the billionaires. And Patreon as the Edibles Club. You can join my club on Patreon. It's really cool. You have a direct line to me. So if you ever have any edible questions, I'm right there. And I'm like, what do you need? What do you want to infuse? I'll help you out. That's the point of
Right.
the club.
That's awesome. Well, I'll make sure all that stuff is in the show notes so people can
Cool.
find it. And Vanessa, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to see the show, and I hope we get to meet in person one day.
I would love that. Thank you.
All right.